Hi, my name is Josie Gery. I'm a junior in Flaherty Hall. I'm a neuroscience and Spanish double major with a minor in compassionate care medicine on the pre-med track, and I'm originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana. So my professor, Dr. Branco, she always did such. I had her for several classes, and she always did such a great job of relating certain slides and topics to what's going on in the real world. So I took a class with her where we learned about drugs. So we learned about a lot of the current day issues with drugs, or even in biochem, we'd relate what we were learning to certain clinical issues and certain drugs that are really present in medicine and even in pop culture today. So she just really made class engaging, especially considering some of the lectures were those big science lectures where you can kind of feel like you're getting lost in the ocean a little bit sometimes. She did a good way of kind of bringing it back in of why we love science so much and why we're studying it. I had her as a professor in London for this past summer for her neuropharmacology class, and being in that smaller class, we got to really delve into a lot of the social issues that are affecting medicine, a lot of the stigmatization of people who are addicted to drugs and how the world views them. And I think her allowing us to engage in those discussions in a really in-depth way allowed us to really think about the big issues in medicine, and how we how we need to treat all of our patients with the with compassion, no matter what background they're coming from. The way we did our exams in that class, it was very strange, and I was a little unsure of it when we first when she first told us about it. So we would take our exams. We'd take our exam in 45 minutes and then do the same exam but with a group of 3 afterwards, which at first I was oh, this is bizarre, I don't know if I like it, but I ended up liking it a lot. And at the beginning of the semester, at the end of the semester, she would send out a survey just hearing our feedback. Did we like the group exams? Did we not? And then she would use that feedback to kind of adjust her class, within that semester, or I assume then in following years. So just having that constant engagement with her style of the class and our feedback of it was really nice to know that she genuinely wants what's best for our learning. Josie, I just say thank you so much for really engaging my learning. I think by taking your classes, I've become a lot more excited about science, and that's really kind of helped inform my decision to want to go into medicine.
I'm Rachel Branco. I am in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, but I overwhelmingly teach for the Neuroscience and Behavior program, which is a cross-college interdisciplinary undergraduate major. From the South, broadly defined, and I had all my training in neuroscience. I had quite a lot of abroad experiences during my undergraduate and graduate training, and that's a big passion of mine too, is creating, supporting study abroad opportunities for our neuroscience and behavior majors. I like gardening, extraordinarily enthusiastic about cheese. That's great. Yeah, that's me. The Notre Dame, it really was my dream job when I found it, because I was really excited and passionate about the opportunity to create new courses. I had a little bit of experience in new course design. And at the time, the neuroscience and behavior major was relatively young here, and they were just looking to expand the course opportunities for the students, particularly within the biochemistry space. They also, at that time, didn't have any study abroad opportunities for the neuroscience and behavior major. And so I was this is my dream job. I can create these classes. I love to teach, and I can create these study abroad opportunities. To be honest, I didn't have a strong connection to South Bend, and kind of moved up here from Atlanta, and it was so cold, and I didn't own a coat. I didn't even own long sleeves, but I've since really made it work, and have loved being here, and have really loved being able to create the classes and be part of the growth of the neuroscience and behavior program since then. As a person deeply interested in developing the skills and content knowledge necessary to be a good neuroscientist, it's hard to achieve that goal if a student doesn't have some level of well-being. So when I think about what promotes a state open to learning, I think one way to think about it, that is what's called the HALT model, HALT, whether that student is hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And not all of those things are in my control, right? Whether a student hasn't eaten that day, but as far as things are in my control to encourage students to not be hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, and to create a classroom environment that fosters a sense of connection, that also fosters the ability to more authentically engage with the material and have more authentic enthusiasm for the material. I mean, also it's just more fun to work with happier students, right? So like one of the reasons that I like being in college education is because you're at this point where you're talking to students that are thinking about launching themselves to the next part of their life. Like it's an inherently forward looking phase of life. And I don't think students should be downtrodden, right? In that phase of life, right? If you're thinking about the goal of college is to launch them, like part of that is having good well-being, good mental health practices, and seeing what that looks like in a more adult context. And in like a small way, an instructor can be a part of that training for adulthood as well, I think. So I do teach a variety of contexts. Abroad is normally 20 to 30 students. My upper level electives are in the range of 30-ish students. And then my large lecture classes are between 150 and 250 students. And I really feel that a student is going to be most open to learning and capable for growth in a class if they feel like they belong in that class. In addition to feeling like so that's one issue. How do you help students feel like they belong in a classroom, that they are known and valued, and that their particular mind and background and voice matters, like even in a really large lecture class? I think it's relatively easier, obviously, in a smaller class because you can learn their names, learn their stories, have more conversations, have more discussion-based class, and have more like essay-based assessments. In larger classes, like the large science classes where I teach, where that's not possible, I think you can still instill a sense of your unique piece, like whatever makes you you is valued in this classroom. You just kind of have to be intentional about it. And honestly, you're not going to like remember all of that for every student, but you can invite that sort of conversation. So some of the strategies that I found work for instilling that sense of kind of belonging in a larger classroom is really taking advantage of the first day of class. So the first day of class is not, in my eyes, not just an opportunity to review the syllabus and introduce clarity, but to have like a bi-directional introduction. So I can introduce myself and have a bit of vulnerability about who I am and why I'm passionate about that subject. And then I usually take some explicit time to be like, who are you, right? So even at a large class level, to do silly games like, okay, who's a dog person? Who's a cat person? Who puts toothpaste on before brushing their teeth or before the water, like just silly games. And then you can get into more like, who's pre-med, who wants to go to graduate school? What are the different majors represented here? What are the different languages spoken at home? Like even questions like that can start to show a sense of who's in the room, like what backgrounds are in the room, what kind of assumptions and reasons for being there. And so that's happening, in a large classroom, but that person is still having to like self-identify, right? Their senses of identity in a large classroom. I also do some other things to, in a large classroom, improve the sense of belonging. I make students sit relatively close to each other. So I cordon off part of the room. Students typically want to spread out and kind of be towards the back, and I prevent that and then I give them time when we do worked examples to like, hey, reintroduce yourself to everyone around you. I know you forgot their name, so we'll just do that a few times throughout the semester, because I want them to feel like, at least I have a friend in this class. At least I know the names of the people around me. In my larger classes, I tend to try to provide some sort of pre-class, maybe warm up. So like in biochemistry, I do a song of the day. And students can suggest song of the day. So if it's a student suggested one, I'll say such and such student suggested the song for the day. For another large science class, I have just a thinking question about like life or logic that's not at all related to the content. So they have something to talk about with people next to them before we jump in. Okay, so that was kind of one thing I think about. How do you promote a sense of belonging even in a large classroom? And this can promote well-being. A second thing I think about that's a big difference between small and large classrooms is how do you foster a sense of internal motivation for this course? Which again, tends to be easier-ish in a smaller class because maybe they're doing a final assignment where they can pick the topic, or they're doing a research project where they can guide their own research or something. And so that's how they're bringing their own like inherent motivation to the class. And that's harder in a larger class, right? So I try to do a few things to, well, I should back up and say, why do I want them to find inherent motivation? Because I think extrinsic motivation, just grade-based motivation, is honestly like a pretty poor mechanism for long-term learning and long-term caring about the subject, right? And if as an instructor within the major, we're really trying to foster people that are passionate and capable in the subject, the internal motivation has to kick in at some point. Like in my biochem class, which is an extraordinarily content-heavy, lecture-based 250-person class, to invite at least for them to think about their internal motivation, I have a short, all or nothing extra credit assignment where they have to write a 1 to 2 page little response about what attributes about themselves resonate with something that we've learned in biochemistry. And that has been wonderful and really surprising. A lot of the students kind of resonate with the idea of medicine and this potential for healing, but there's actually a lot of diversity in how people are kind of like whetting their appetite for this subject. Like some people talk about it being resonant with their faith or with their family background, or that they just like difficult problems and like the kind of experimental design problem solving component of it. So, and I like wouldn't know that, and I don't think they would necessarily take the time to think about it themselves if I didn't have it as extra credit assignment. Super easy to grade. Everyone's happy they get extra credit. Another way I've tried to do this is short, all or nothing graded, creative, research-based written assignments. Like in my molecular neuroscience class, which is 150 to 160 students, they get to pick an application topic of their own choice that they cover for the entire semester, because again, the actual class is extraordinarily lecture-based and content-heavy. And so they have these regular, I call them deep dive assignments, where they have to do a deep dive about how the content from that class applies to Alzheimer's disease or addiction or psychedelics or autism, like whatever it is they choose. And then they, over the course of the semester, actually kind of build out like this multi-part research story about how that applies to something that they've already self-identified that they care about. So I think it's possible in large classes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an extraordinarily high rating or effort lift, but with a little bit of intentionality. If nothing else, inviting the students to think about it for themselves, about like, why do you care? Like outside, if grades didn't matter to you, why do you care? I think goes a long way for them to have a moment to think about, why does this subject matter, like in a broader context. When I became a teaching professor, I kind of said goodbye to my like neuroscience lab research, and that was like a little sad for me, but I loved teaching, so I was into it. And then I've since discovered, oh my gosh, there's this entire pedagogy literature about how to do this well, and have since like gotten into it and been able to publish some in it. I really think like if you can get a student where they're like, I am comfortable and wanted here, like I belong in this course and in this academic field, I think that honestly like smooths over a lot of teaching sins, right? And so the idea of how you communicate about your course, it doesn't have to be extraordinarily complicated how you say that. You can just say something like, I'm glad you're here. And that will be like a net positive in terms of increasing the sense of belonging, as opposed to being like, this is a weed out course, half you guys are gonna fail, or like, we'll see who makes it. I think that language can really be detrimental towards kind of fostering any amount of authentic learning in the class. So like it can be as much as just on the first day, you're going to learn about something great. I'm glad you're here. Let's do this together. Like can do a lot. Yeah. So I think like for tenure track faculty, they have a lot on their plate and a lot that they're committed to do and to doing great. And like they're some of the best in the world at doing that. That's awesome. So when they're thinking about their teaching commitments, I think often they don't want an extraordinarily heavy lift in terms of the time commitment and the grading, and they often are not in the mood to like completely rehaul a class. I think it's in those moments just like maximizing your use of the first day of class, thinking more critically about your language and how you're inviting belonging and growth, like can do a lot even if you don't do anything else in terms of your like lectures or assessment style. Yeah, and I mean, if nothing else, maybe make friends with the teaching faculty in your department, right? The people who are really passionate about it and maybe do have the time to help you out with something that you see as a need in your class, then there are other people that you can leverage as resources for that as well. So in every one of my classes, I solicit student feedback at least twice, one during the middle of the semester and one near the end of the semester. I just use a Google form and they get some small amount of points for filling out the form. It's like worth them as a homework assignment. I think it's helpful in a few ways. I use the feedback as a way to ask students to assess their own learning. Are you studying enough? Are you doing the homework on time? Like what about your own student behavior is promoting your learning here? Some sort of like kind of metacognitive tasks. And then I ask for, how am I doing? Like, what do you like that I'm doing? What do you not like that I'm doing? This allows me for the mid-semester feedback to pivot a little bit for the second half of the semester if there are needs. Again, that doesn't have to be extraordinarily hard. I've started in my larger classes, they're not open-ended questions. I have a large checklist of things I do and I say, check off the things you like, and then a long list, check off the things you don't like, because, and I don't want to be reading through 250, essays about how bad my teaching is, but so you can kind of make it into more of a survey with easy action items afterwards. So that's nice in the middle of the semester. It's also great to do at the end of the semester because one, it helps me improve my class for the next time I teach it and kind of have a summary at the very end of the semester, what are some impressions. But kind of from a selfish point of view, it's a smart move as an instructor because students that feel like they have a mechanism to be heard are happier students, right? And if you can give an end of semester feedback form right before SIFs are due, then they're going to feel like their voice has been heard authentically already, right? So I think it can be a win-win if you solicit feedback in that way. I call them quasi-group exams. They're not necessarily for everyone, but I like them. So when I give exams, even in my very large classes, in my 250-person class, in an hour and 15-minute exam period, they have 50 minutes to take the exam individually. We collect their individual exam, and then they have 25 minutes to take the exact same exam a second time, but they can talk to the people around them. I've done a lot of work to think about how to optimize it because the hard part is just the logistics, right? Like in a large class, how to logistically make this work, but I think it's really doable. The advantages to the student are they get immediate feedback, and we know immediate feedback improves long-term retention of learning. So it greatly reduces the amount of people coming to my office hours and they're confused about their grade. Their grade on that exam is 80% from their individual score and 20% from their group grade. So I still think it very authentically reflects their individual capabilities, but that little boost from the group exam grade makes students happy. So that's good. I also like that it explicitly puts value on your ability to communicate with others and that's an expectation for excellence in science, even though most science courses are relatively individually siloed in their performance. So I think there are a lot of advantages. That's why I do it. Something you mentioned before was about how flexibility in assignments can promote student well-being. And I know that's true. And I also know that's not possible in a lot of the classes I teach, particularly in the large classes. I'm just not going to have flexible due dates to keep myself sane and to keep myself on a grading schedule that is reasonable for me. So having things like group exams or dropped homeworks or extra credit opportunities, or I even allow my students to drop an entire exam, I'm building the flexibility into the framework, right? So there's inherent grace in the system, But once that system is set, I'm extraordinarily strict about it, right? There's no late work, so, and then that way I can stick to a schedule, and then I don't have to quibble with students, or I don't want to say quibble with students. I just don't have the time to fully understand everything that they're going through that might merit, a late submission or something, or a bad homework grade. So I just build it into the system. You can drop it, right? Or whatever it is. So I'm a big fan of structural grace, and then stick to it very strictly in large classes.